If you drive close enough, there's probably a truck or something.
Well, it was new, but I got involved. I was an absentee owner. You know, not like the locals. So I ended up with a tower, a power tower. I ended up with a weather tower.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it's got the good and bad, but you see a lot of them in the water now too. You know, like going over to Hawaii. Where are you from? Michigan? USA?
USA, absolutely.
Well, you know, I was affiliated with the guys in San Diego and out in there, and San Francisco, but then they switched everything to Minneapolis over here.
That's right.
All the communications.
250 feet away, so now we can't put a terminal. He's definitely there. Get to the point, that's what we need to bring it. Okay, good. That's getting to be to the point that it's getting some. Yeah.
Let's move to holding companies. So what is a holding company? A holding company is just an entity that owns other entities. Holding companies are sometimes referred to as umbrella companies or parent companies, and they will own the subsidiary or child companies. So the holding or parent company owns the subsidiary or child companies. Typically, the holding company or the parent company doesn't actually have any of its own business operations, and it doesn't really conduct any independent business on its own. The subsidiary companies are the ones that will usually actually be in some business operation. They're the ones selling the products or services. They're the ones hiring employees, paying vendors. So the subsidiary or child companies are the ones that are actually engaging in a business operation, whereas the holding company quite literally just holds those other subsidiaries. And sometimes, depending on the nature of the business, the holding company might own some major assets or real estate that then the subsidiaries would rent or lease or otherwise use from the holding company. So why would we create a holding company? What's the point? Why would we even do this in the first place? For the most part, the primary purpose of having a holding company structure is for additional liability or asset protection. Let's back it up a little bit. So we know generally that the LLCs and corporations, the main reason we use those is for liability protection. If an LLC is involved in a lawsuit or has some other kind of liability, it's just the assets of the LLC that are going to be subject to that liability or subject to any risk from that liability. Only the assets of the LLC, not the assets of the individual members or owners of the LLC, just that LLC's assets. So let's say you've got multiple business operations. Maybe you do a lot of different businesses, or you have different lines of business going on, or if you are a real estate investor and you have multiple properties that you're holding. Best practice generally is to have each operation or each piece of property owned by its own separate LLC, because we want to separate the liability of each operation. If business A gets sued or has some liability, we don't want business B to be at risk, or the assets of business B to be at risk of that liability. Or if we're talking about real estate, if there's an issue or liability over property A, we don't want property B to be subject to that. We want to keep things separate. So in a lot of instances, if we have multiple operations going, we want to have multiple entities so each one is separate and each has its own liability. And so when we're talking a holding company or a parent subsidiary structure, if the holding company or the parent company owns major assets, big pieces of equipment, or commercial real estate buildings, or even an extensive intellectual property portfolio. If those assets belong to the holding company, then liabilities to the subsidiary companies, the idea is that it won't affect those assets because that liability is separate from the holding company. So the assets of the holding company are going to be protected from the liabilities of the subsidiary or child companies. So really, in most situations, that's the primary advantage of using a holding company structure, is to separate liability between your different business operations and really to add some level of asset protection for important or highly valuable assets of that might belong to all of the companies, or that might be used by all of the subsidiaries. Really, the idea is just to provide an extra level of separation and separateness to protect certain assets and to protect the different functions and assets of the individual businesses too. Holding companies also allow you to have a little bit more control over like the organization and branding of the subsidiary companies. So if you are, let's say, operating multiple businesses, each subsidiary, each child business has its own, can be structured essentially in its own way as far as like management goes and organization and everything. And then branding, marketing, everything can be under that particular business. And if we compare this to doing something like having one LLC and using different DBAs or trade names, that's also a good way of having kind of separate branding for different business operations. But when we're talking about DBAs or trade names, those don't create separate entities like a parent-child or holding subsidiary structure would. Each DBA is still a part of the one entity. So that doesn't give you liability protection. But we have separate entities, then we've separated the liability and we have separate businesses that can really operate completely independently of each other. But I think one of the biggest benefits of having a holding company structure is with taxes. In most cases, it really helps to streamline your taxes when you're dealing with multiple business entities. Rather than filing multiple tax returns, it may be possible to just do one consolidated tax return for all of them. That's not always the case, but often that can work out and really does help to streamline the whole process so you're not dealing with a ton of different tax filings every year. When we're talking about LLCs in this context, and I'm talking primarily about LLCs in holding company structures, but you can have a parent subsidiary structure where they're not all LLCs. They can be corporations, they can be partnerships or other types of entities. I'm focusing mostly on LLCs because that's what I deal with for the most part. But what I'm talking about generally extends to those different types of entities. But taxes will be a little different depending on what kinds of entities we're dealing with. But so anyway, when we're talking about LLCs, each of the subsidiaries would be a single member LLC because the parent company is the member of each of the subsidiaries. LLCs are pass-through entities, which means that the taxes, the profits and losses pass through to the owner or the members of the LLC. The LLC itself doesn't pay taxes on the profits. Rather, it passes through to the individual members themselves. So then let's say we have subsidiary A, B, and C. Each of their incomes will pass through up to the holding company. Then from the holding company, they would pass through to the actual members, the owners of the holding company. Speaking of taxes, let's talk really quick about S-corps and holding company structures. Entities that are taxed as an S-corporation can't be owned by other entities, whereas traditional, like an LLC or a C corporation, an LLC can be owned by another LLC or by a corporation, and vice versa. A corporation can have an LLC that's a shareholder, but S corporations in particular can't be owned by other entities. So you can't have an LLC that is the member of an S corp. So in the context of holding companies, these subsidiaries can't be taxed as S corporations because they are owned by the parent company. But the parent company, assuming it's owned by individuals, can be taxed as an S corp. So even though the subsidiaries are not taxed as S corporations, the income still flows, passes through to the parent company, which is taxed as an S corporation. So in the end, ultimately, all of the income is pretty much going to be taxed like you're an S corporation for all of the entities. So those are some of the primary advantages when we're talking about holding companies and parent subsidiary structures or umbrella companies. But these kinds of structures aren't without their faults. There are definitely some disadvantages to having holding company or a parent subsidiary structure in your businesses. The biggest one really is the added just organizational and administrative hassle. You're not just filing or forming one company, you're forming at least 2, maybe 3, 4, 5, 10, a million companies. That means filing fees for each one that you form, annual filings. Each state, I believe, has some kind of annual reporting requirement. So each entity is going to be subject to those reporting requirements. Any kind of fees that are subject, it's going to be each one. You need separate accounting records, separate bank accounts. There's just a lot more that goes into it when you're dealing with multiple companies, because you're dealing with multiple companies, and the fact that they're all owned by the one doesn't negate that. You're still dealing with multiple companies. So I think that's the primary drawback, and it can be a pretty big hassle in a lot of situations. And since the whole idea here is separateness for separate liability, that means keeping everything separate. So separate records, separate bank accounts, separate
Welcome back to Taxes Made Simple. I'm your host, Carlton Dennis, and in today's video, I'm going to explain exactly how to pay yourself as a limited liability company in 2025. A lot of people form LLCs to take advantage of the tremendous benefits that they offer, but then once they start making money, they realize that they have absolutely no idea how to pay themselves correctly from their LLCs. The last thing that you want, especially when you're finding success in your business, is to get in trouble because you didn't pay yourself correctly from your LLC. So if you're somebody that's new to business, make sure you watch all the way till the end of this video because I'll give you insights on how you need to pay yourself. Let's dive in. The first thing that you need to know about paying yourself as an LLC is that when you're the owner of an LLC, you have the option to pay yourself through what is called an owner's draw. Remember that phrase, owner's draw. Keep in mind that owner's draws are also commonly referred to as owner's distributions. But an owner's draw or an owner's distribution is when you, as the owner of the business, withdraw money from the business and transfer it to your personal account so that you can use it for personal use. Remember, as a business owner, your goal should always be to keep your personal finances and your business finances completely separate from one another. Otherwise, you can accidentally commingle funds, which can get you into legal trouble with the government, which you definitely don't want to deal with. So if you're somebody that wants to be a steward of your finances, you'll make sure you don't commingle. Owner's draws are designed to prevent this exact thing from happening. So when you think of an owner's draw, think of money being taken out of your LLC's bank account and being moved to a personal account that you can use for personal expenses. Now, I know you might be wondering, Carlton, how exactly do I set this owner's draw up? Don't worry, I've got your back here. Here are the steps on how you take the owner's draw. Step number 1, let's make sure you have your EIN number. EIN stands for Employer Identification Number. An EIN is a 9-digit number assigned by the IRS that is used by the government to track your business for tax purposes. You can apply for an EIN directly on the IRS's website. The IRS requires you to provide some basic information about your business when you apply for an EIN, such as the type of entity that it is. But once you receive your EIN from the IRS, you can move on to step number 2. Step number 2 is to make sure that you set up your business bank account. If you already have one for your LLC, then great. But if not, you're definitely going to need to do this. This is a very important step to getting paid. Most banks have options for business bank accounts. So you can go to your preferred bank, open up a business bank account with your EIN number. You'll need your EIN to open the business bank account. Once you provide the bank with your EIN, they will link the EIN to your business bank account so that this account is tied to your EIN instead of your Social Security. After your business bank account is set up, you will be able to start depositing money earned by your business under its EIN number to this account. And you can store the business's funds in this account. Now, here is where it gets interesting, and here's where the owner draw comes into play. Step number 3, make your owner's draw. After your business has made enough money and you're ready to start paying yourself personally and taking some of the profits from your business to save for taxes, you can send the amount you want to take from your business bank account to your personal checking account. You can do this via a check, a bank transfer, or just cash. I recommend doing it via a check or bank transfer so that there is more of a paper trail, just in case you need this later on. You should also keep a record of the draw, including the date, the amount, and the purpose for your bookkeeping records. It is crucial to keep proper records of all of your business transactions, including owner's draws. Once you transfer the money and you record the transaction, then the owner's draw will be complete. But once it is in your personal bank account, you will be free to use it for your personal purposes. Just keep in mind, because this is absolutely crucial, this is your personal account. When you have an LLC, you can use the owner's draw in lieu of a salary. This is where a lot of people get confused. When you're an LLC, you do not have to pay yourself a set salary. It is up to you to decide which intervals you pay yourself in and how much you pay yourself in each distribution. The intervals and the amounts do not have to be even. Many LLC owners enjoy the flexibility that owner's draws provide. This is because this flexibility allows them to leave more money in the business bank account when the business needs more cash on hand, and to withdraw larger amounts of money when they're ready to take more profits personally. But here's a word of caution. When it comes to owner's draws, some new business owners make the mistake of withdrawing too much money too soon. And this is understandable because, after all, it can be very exciting when you form a new business, and when it starts making money, you get excited. You want to reinvest personally into the stock market.
If you're hoping to undertake a medium-scale or large-scale wind project, you'll almost certainly need input from a professional consultant at some stage. However, before you get to this stage, you may want to make some initial investigations yourself of the site you have in mind for your wind turbine. You can do this with a simple map survey and a visit to the site and surrounding area. It might be a good idea to do this before you consult the community. If the site's not viable, there's no point in getting hopes up. Alternatively, you could run some initial consultation events, introducing to the community the idea of renewable energy projects and getting a sense of which technologies people like the idea of. If wind energy isn't popular, you may need to think again. Although most people will support an initial feasibility study once presented with the facts about wind. If you're going to investigate wind, there are some questions that you can answer for yourselves before you need to hire a consultant. What is the approximate average annual wind speed at your prospective site? You can find this out online using the Noble Wind Speed database. This is a rough guide only, but if it shows 6 meters per second or more at 45 meters above ground level, then it's worth investigating further. Is the site clear of trees or buildings? Remember, you want clean wind as far as possible, but some woodland or other feature is probably okay if you are looking at a turbine that will be significantly taller than any obstacles. Is it in a national park or area of outstanding natural beauty? This won't absolutely prevent you erecting a turbine, but it will make obtaining planning permission less likely. Are there any domestic dwellings within 400 meters of the proposed site? If so, your wind project is probably not feasible because of planning restrictions that relate to noise and other impacts. Are there any bridleways within 200 meters? Turbines cannot be closer than this. Are there any overhead power cables within falling distance of the turbine? Falling distance is deemed to be the height of the turbine's hub, plus the length of the rotor, plus another 30 meters for the sake of safety. Are there any airfields, TV transmitters, or air traffic control towers within 3 miles? Again, not necessarily a deal breaker, but you need to be aware of them and possibly take them into account into the design of the site. You'll also need to consult with the people who own or manage these facilities. Where is the nearest place you could connect into the national grid? You obviously need to do this to export the electricity you generate. If the nearest substation is several miles away, the cost of transmission could be too high for all but the larger schemes. How easy is the site to access with large machinery? Articulated lorries will need to get up there with the turbine components. Will a new road access need building? Finally, who owns the land? So, you've checked the wind speed, there are no houses, bridle paths, airfields, or overhead lines too close. You know there's a substation nearby and an access road, and you're confident that the landowner can be contacted. It's probably time to talk to a consultant, the community, and the local planning authority. Almost certainly yes. And to get it, you'll have to show that you've carried out all of the required studies and properly consulted with all those who might be affected by the turbine. This is no small task, but plenty of people have done exactly this. If the consultant whom you have engaged agrees with your initial assessment, he or she will then need to do some more detailed site assessments. First of these will be to make an accurate measure of wind speed and other factors like wind direction. This will involve erecting a mast that supports all the measuring equipment at the height that the proposed turbine will be. This is a critical moment in your project because the mast will attract attention. If you haven't already gone public with your plans, people will now want to know what's going on. And this is the point at which an anti-wind campaign can take off very quickly. You must therefore have a comprehensive plan for consultation, for sharing the data and keeping people informed. Other sections of this resource will introduce you to community consultation in more detail. Your local authority will require several pieces of documentation. If you're hoping to install a large turbine, you may need a full environmental impact assessment. But at the very least, you will need to carry out various studies. These include covering landscape impact and investigating the ecology of the site, in particular bat and bird studies. They'll be needed to support any planning application. Other sections of this resource will introduce you to the planning system in more detail. You'll need to work with the grid operator to ensure that your proposed connection is suitable. Small projects can often be connected to the grid without permission, just by using compliant equipment, but medium to large wind will most likely exceed this. If your project is in a very rural area or is reasonably large, there may be a cost to upgrade the grid to take the new load. Dialogue with the grid provider should be started early, and you should keep them up to date so that any costs can be calculated into the project finances. Upgrading the grid to accept a new connection can be quite time-consuming, and in some areas you may need to put your project in a queue for this, so early and regular communication will help minimize this period. Quite a long time. You'll need to measure the wind speed for at least 1 full year. If timed correctly, the various other studies can be done in the meantime. The BAT survey, for example, will be carried out between May and September. You should reckon on a minimum of 2 years to complete all studies and public consultation. You should then estimate another year as a minimum to secure planning permission, including the need to appeal if necessary. You'll also need this time to secure project finance for the full installation. When you add this all up, it's pretty daunting, but it is essentially a series of smaller, discrete tasks and costs, and you should treat the completion of each stage as a cause to celebrate. Also remember that what you learn from the process, whatever the outcome, will be useful learning for other communities trying to achieve the same. So publicize your progress, warts and all. This obviously depends on the scale of the project, but the sums are not insignificant. Before you even think about buying a turbine or preparing the site, you'll need to secure funding to pay for the specialist support, like consultancy and impact studies. A good wind site will repay this investment, but this is risk capital. If you fail to get planning permission, you will not recoup these costs. Other sections of this resource will introduce you to project finance in more detail. The purchase and installation of a single large wind turbine, say a 1 megawatt machine, along with all the associated costs of consultation, planning, legal, grid connection and so on, is probably in the order of £1.5 million. Thanks for watching.
Anybody from Wyoming will tell you the wind here is almost always blowing. But today, a familiar landmark along the Colorado-Wyoming border is still. The Ponaquin Wind Farm has been shut down and decommissioned by its operator, Xcel Energy.
It was no longer in the best interest of our customers to keep operating it. Really, they're two separate issues. The Ponaquin Wind Farm is nearly 20 years old. It is relatively small in size. It did not make sense to keep investing in the operations of that facility.
The average lifespan of a wind turbine is about 20 to 25 years. But with maintenance and equipment and upgrades, a turbine could last up to 40 years. These 44 turbines have been around for 18 years and had a capacity to generate 750 kilowatts of electricity each. But technology has changed. The average wind turbine built today generates twice that or more. Jonathan Naughton directs the Wind Energy Research Center at the University of Wyoming. He says the decision to decommission comes down to economics.
A 15-year-old wind farm is on the verge of where that business decision could be made to shut it down. Now, hopefully in many cases they would choose to repower, put in new turbines in place if the wind farm is amenable to that.
But these turbines won't be replaced because in order for large operators like Xcel to invest, wind farms need to be bigger in order to be profitable. So the Ponaquin site will come down, and bison rancher Ron Thiel wants to make sure it's cleaned up the right way.
All the disruption of grass, which means roads, concrete, chain link fences, towers, they need to be gone so that we're back to square one, which is how they received the property.
Thiel owns and leases some of the property where Ponaquin was built in Wyoming and Colorado. Xcel says it's committed to eliminating any trace of the wind farm once it comes down. But when a wind farm needs to be cleaned up, it's tricky because there's no one set of rules. Instead, it's a combination of federal guidelines, sometimes state regulations, sometimes private agreements. It all raises questions about the long-term environmental impacts of these farms. Nationwide, there are around 49,000 wind turbines and at least 2,700 that have been decommissioned since America's first wind energy boom in the 1970s. Most of these retired turbines are in Southern California. The Tehachapi wind farm sits on the edge of the Mojave Desert. It was built during that initial wind energy boom decades ago. But many of the older turbines are no longer working, like skeletons standing on the desert hillside, slowly decaying. Back then, there was very little regulation.
When they were built in the mid to late 70s, they didn't have a lot of permitting issues about who was going to take them down or who was going to recover the sites after they were done producing power. When the bottom fell out of the market, most of the companies that produced the wind turbines went bankrupt.
The broken down past serves as a reminder of the need for an adequate cleanup plan today.
Even though the Ponaquin site spans 2 states, the turbines themselves are in Colorado and subject to a patchwork of state and local regulations. But here in Wyoming, regulators say they saw the future coming and put rules on the books a full year before the federal guidelines came out.
In Wyoming, wind energy producers are required to put up bonds to cover the cost of taking down turbines and returning the land to the way it was. Outside of Rawlins, Wyoming, construction is scheduled to begin late this year on the largest planned wind farm in North America. The Chokecherry and Sierra Madre Wind Project will populate these remote bluffs with giant next-generation wind turbines, generating enough electricity for around 3 million homes. Like Ponaquin, this massive wind farm will span government and private land. Here, the Bureau of Land Management has taken the lead.
The surface is our jurisdiction. And that means all elements of the habitat, the soils, the vegetation. So when it comes to what we require to be put back, I think is pretty comprehensive.
The federal BLM is also working side by side with the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality to oversee the project. Now, bonding is required for the full amount of decommissioning and reclamation.
So if somebody did walk away, we do have security in place to close that facility out. All that is spelled out up front before the project even begins construction.
The State of Wyoming BLM partnership may set a new blueprint on how wind farms are managed and eventually decommissioned. But to date, there are no binding federal regulations in place.
I think, yes, we need to have a consortium that is willing to discuss these things and understand they all come with different perspectives, but in a way that it's economic to develop wind plants moving forward.
As for the Ponaquin wind farm, Xcel's plan is to blow up the towers this fall and then disassemble the blades. Some of the structure will be recycled as scrap, and the rest will end up in a landfill.
You have to realize with renewable energy, it's not free from impacts.
For Inside Energy, I'm Lee Patterson.
You believe that the people of North Dakota are the Norwegians of America. What do you mean about the North Dakotans being the Norwegians of America?
Well, nobody's really looked at North Dakota for decades. There's 750,000 people there, almost unlimited amount of stranded nat gas. The more nat gas you find a use for, like electricity, the more oil you can take out of the ground with fracking. They are incredibly wealthy. It's one of the only states with its own banking system. They will be the Norwegians. They will be, in terms of net worth underground, no question, they are going to be the richest Americans. And I'd say it's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years. I've been spending a lot of time there, and there's a really interesting opportunity for data centers because of all their energy. And they've just green-lighted a pipeline that gets nat gas on its way to Fargo, which has a massive campus of Microsoft there. So you got the engineers. I'm licking my chops on that place. I know you've looked at it before, Stuart. This is a very interesting state. It's got a ton of energy.
The Norwegians have a national wealth fund which is approaching $1 trillion. And there's not many million Norwegians around. They got all of that money from offshore oil drilling. Are you suggesting virtually the same thing in North Dakota? Drill, baby, drill, and put the money into the state, and it becomes extremely wealthy? That's your scenario, right?
That is the plan of the Governor Kelly. That is his plan. He's the new sheriff in town, and he loves that idea, and that's exactly what he's going to do. And I think the people of North Dakota are 100% behind him, and all of us as investors are saying, yippee-i-o-ki-yay, look at all that energy. That's what we're talking about here. The grid is completely wiped out in America. You can't find any more gigawatts of power. So this is how it's going to happen. You're going to build these pipelines, find states like this where they're pro-business, where they approve these pipelines within the state, so you're not trying to get over a state line, and then you come in with the capital, bring in the generators, build out the data centers, and there's a insatiable demand for AI right now. This is one of the states that's going to hit it out of the park. And yes, they are going to be the Norwegians of America.
Hi everybody. In case you didn't see the other video, I'm here in Ledyard, Iowa with my friend Connie. We came out to visit these 600-foot turbines this project is 3 years old, and we just happened as we stopped to look at it. The farmer that lives right over here stopped to talk to us, and first thing he says, I asked him how far away that one was, and he says, I don't know, but I hate them. I hate farming around them. And anyway, he mentioned that, he can hear on certain days, he can hear them in his house with the windows closed. And also, this project, which is only about 3 years old, has sold 3 times already. So what happens, he said they've sold 3 times. So they suck out all the tax credits when they build them. They suck out, and then they sell it. Then the next company sucks out all the credits they can out of it, and they sell it. And the third company, which is what owns them now, will more than likely do the same thing. So when Invenergy comes in and tells Dickinson County that we are going to be such wonderful partners for you and you're just going to love us, how long are they going to be around? And who's the next company we have to deal with if we're having trouble with noise or with a broken turbine, or if you're having trouble with your drainage? Who's going to fix that? I mean, he has 20 acres over here that he lost a crop on last year with drainage issues. Will one of these new companies fix that? He doesn't think so. So let's be smart about this. This is Dickinson County. Let's be smart. Our economy depends on tourism. Our family life in the country depends on quiet, clear skies. Let's be smart. Let's say no, and no means no.
It was a typical day for 4 men who were set to perform maintenance on a wind turbine on October 29, 2013. They were about to begin their work. All went according to plan up until the middle of the day. The walkie-talkie in Mill 1 then makes a creaking sound all of a sudden. Co-workers suspected that Arjan and Don were experiencing some kind of difficulty. It was critical that they make their way to the exit as quickly as possible. However, due to the poor signal in the elevator, they were unable to communicate with one another. What was going on? After going outdoors, the co-workers saw that a fire had started somewhere in the building. At a height of 70 meters, Arjan and Don were perched atop the wind turbine. At a height of 200 feet above the ground, hundreds of tons of metal are spinning on an engine with the intention of producing various forms of energy. With very little human activity, windmills and wind turbines are safe machinery to operate when they are regularly maintained and updated. But if something goes wrong, just like any other enormous machinery, they have the potential to destroy everybody who is nearby. That was made abundantly clear on the 29th of October 2013, when a group of 4 men consisting of Arjan Cortus, age 21, Don Kos, age 19, and 2 other men, both of whom were 30 years old, were sent out to conduct routine maintenance on a group of 12 wind turbines at the Delta Winds Pitchdovit wind farm in Oltgensplaat, Netherlands. While Arjan and Dan were both relatively new to their jobs, the other 2 members of the team had each been working on wind turbines for more than 5 years. It was nothing out of the ordinary for them to do the maintenance that they had planned for that day. There have been dozens of occasions over the course of the past year when this particular team has successfully conducted this repair on turbines that are identical to this one. They had no idea that the Vesta V66 model turbine, which had a capacity of 1.75 megawatts, was a time bomb that was only waiting to go off. Because of its outdated components, the model was on the verge of exploding and it was no longer being distributed. Should this occur, it would not be the first time that a Vesta turbine has been the source of risk. As the morning of the 29th dragged on, the 4 men eventually arrived at the 5th turbine in the line that was 67 meters above the ground. Over the course of that late autumn day, they started their usual maintenance by climbing to the top of the turbine. Despite the fact that it was initially unclear at the time, a circuit in the electrical system was shorted, which resulted in the fire. This occurred after approximately 30 minutes of mundane work. While the fire was rapidly spreading over the top area of the turbine, the team thought about all the options available to them. They made a hasty run for the hatch, well aware that the stairs were their primary means of escape. Witnesses on the ground below stated that they saw the 2 young men leap into the flames and enter the staircase. They then proceeded to make their way down the stairs just before the stairs were completely consumed by darkness. But Arjan and Don were unable to escape since they were caught on the opposite side of the flames and there was no other way out. They were unable to flee since they were trapped hundreds of feet in the air. As time went on, the dark smoke became thicker. When the fire department arrived, they were unable to do anything. The 2 men were hugging each other when they were standing on top of the windmill. When Arjan made the decision to step inside into the inferno, spectators saw that their pants were already on fire. The burnt remains of his body were discovered later inside the windmill. Unfortunately, Don jumped or fell down the wind turbine. According to the Netherlands Times, the fire department initially had difficulty extinguishing the fire in the engine room due to the height of the building. The only assistance that was provided was in the form of a large crane that arrived several hours later in the evening, accompanied by a group of firefighters. Firefighters and rescue workers below were relatively powerless to do anything on the ground. They went up to see what was remained, but they were too late as the fires became too much for the pair above. A witness saw that Arjan jumped off the top of the mill and into the grassy fields below. Arjan's parents had not heard anything until watching the news in the evening. They heard about an accident in a windmill. Alinda, Arjan's mother, says, "We said to each other, I hope Arjan is not involved. Actually, I felt it then and there. Something is wrong. We were worried, and half an hour later my husband called the company where Arjan worked. Then it indeed turned out that Arjan and his 19-year-old colleague Dan were involved in the accident. One of them had fallen out of the turbine, but he was not identified at that time. The other person was not found yet. A nerve-wracking evening followed, and it was not until midnight that Alinda and her husband heard that their son had been found and had not survived the accident. It was only after the fire had died and the special fireman team had finally been able to ascend the tower that they were able to locate Dan's body and bring it back down to the turbine. Arjan and Dan were seen having an intense hug atop the blazing mill when this terrible photograph was shot. This was the final photograph that was shot of the two of them. In a news release, the Delta Wind Company expressed their sorrow to the media by saying, "The loss of the two colleagues is indescribable and emotionally devastating." The company extends its deepest sympathies to the affected family members of the two employees who passed away. Due to the fact that it was initially uncertain how the fire began, the firm decided to conduct an inquiry into the source of the incident. It was later revealed that the fire had begun as a result of a short circuit within the system. After conducting additional investigations, it was found that the corporation did not have any criminal responsibility for the deaths of Arjan and Dan by the authorities. After further investigation, it was found that the crew had very few options of escape and lacked enough training on what to do in the event of an emergency situation similar to the one they were confronted with. This was due to the high cost of upkeep. In an interview with the newspaper, the parent stated, "Because the Justice Department claims that they dropped the key, it makes it appear as though they were responsible for it. It is likely that their employer is pleased with that. However, the fact of the matter is that those young men should never have been let to work there where they were not supervised. Electrician is the profession of my brother-in-law. Before he is allowed to open a CT cabinet, he must first complete a traineeship that lasts for 2 years. And he was required to be under supervision. And here come two boys from a small company in Barneveld, not even a year on the job, and they are allowed to open a cabinet of I don't know how many volts. Alone? Isn't that crazy?" The technicians who worked on the wind turbine below were perplexed as to why this particular turbine did not have a constant rate descender installed in its turbine shaft. The use of a descender that can drop at a rate of around 2 meters per second makes it possible to reach the ground with relative ease. If this had been installed, it might have prevented the loss of these lives. In 2014, a Dutch political inquiry was launched in response to the tragedy that occurred in Oud-Gensplaat. The inquiry was intended to investigate safety procedures for wind turbine maintenance staff. However, the probes were never completed. A re-examination of the safety requirements for workers in the industry took place in 2018, 4 years after the initial examination. The circumstances surrounding this tragedy were truly one that could have been prevented if Delta Wind had either upgraded or replaced their antiquated turbines. Despite the fact that this tragedy was essential in the establishment of a set of fundamental safety rules for all turbines in different countries. In closing, we would like to say rest in peace to Arjan and Dan. That is the story of the Oud-Gensplaat wind turbine disaster. If you made it this far, please consider commenting, liking, and subscribing as it truly helps me out.